Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's forum. Thank you for logging in. This is the first candidate forum held by the VCDL-PAC. We're very excited to bring it to you. All the filed candidates in the Commonwealth for Attorney General were invited. We have 3 that have shown up: Leslie Haley, Jason Mieres, and Chuck Smith. I want to thank the candidates for making time for us. I know that it's been hectic. You've been traveling all over the Commonwealth and your time is precious. But this forum is a single right, and that one right guarantees all others. Before we start tonight, I also want to thank VCDL-PAC and VCDL Treasurer Pat Webb and the VCDL Social Media Director Ed Levine and VCDL President Phil Van Cleef, who are all on screen tonight, for all their work for on behalf of these forums. Pat will be assisting as necessary and was key in organizing the questions, and so was Phil. And Ed will be handling all the technology. The format for tonight's forum will be each candidate will have 2 minutes for an introduction. We'll alternate the order in which candidates answer questions, and they will be given 1 minute for each answer. Our timekeeper this evening is Ed, and he has a clock that will be running behind him so the candidates can see how much time they have left. And last but not least, I would be remiss if I didn't make a fundraising pitch. As if you have not all been bombarded enough with donation emails and solicitations and text messages. But the VCDL-PAC supports pro-Second Amendment candidates, and we rely solely on donations. 99% of donations go directly to the candidates. And if you go to vcdl.org and you click on contribute, the PAC is the first donation link. And as I always say, we don't have billionaire anti-freedom bullies in our back pocket. We have you. We have VCDL members. We have Second Amendment supporters. And VCDL members are some of the most well-educated 2A supporters in the Commonwealth. So I urge everyone who is listening, if you are not a member, join and contribute to the PAC if you can. And please enjoy this evening's forum. So we're going to jump right in with questions, and the orders for these questions will be Leslie, Jason, and then Chuck. And the first question for this evening is, are you a VCDL member?
And let me just.
Oh, I'm sorry. We needed to do our introductions. I apologize. We're going to do, let's keep that order. Go, Leslie, you have your 2 minutes for introductions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And I have to say, I think never in at least the history of time I remember has this issue and the conversation that we're going to have this evening been more important. You know, I have to tell you, the reason I've stepped up to run for Attorney General is that all of our constitutional rights that start with our Second Amendment rights are in jeopardy like they've never been before. And, I, as an attorney, but also as a citizen, find this to be incredibly, there are so many words we could put on this, but, we've got to fight and we need to stand up strong. This is the time. I actually have a business background and a legal background, and that together is what has caused me to step forward to say, now is the time, now is the appropriate time. This is a corporate law department that the Attorney General's office is, but what we've seen as a lawyer for the party, not a lawyer for the citizens of Virginia, and not in any way. We've seen no backbone, we've seen no strong stance, and I came forward to say it's time to stand up. It's time that we put somebody in that office to be the lawyer for the citizens of Virginia, to stand up for every single one of our constitutional rights, and to let folks know, let our citizens know that they've got somebody standing behind them, but let our other legislators in office know that if they propose laws that violate our constitutional rights, we're going to stand tall and we're going to challenge them right from the beginning. So folks can learn more about me on my website and things, but I'm really happy to be here tonight and engage in this conversation. I think it gives us a great opportunity because never have we been at such a time where these Second Amendment rights in particular are in jeopardy. So thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Jason, you have 2 minutes to make an introduction. He may be frozen. Do we want to see if, oh,
Great, so wonderful to be with you all. Listen, I think the stakes can be higher because, oh, can you hear me?
I can now. You
Can you
fade.
hear me now?
Yeah, no. Do you want to start the 2 minutes over? I think
How does it sound?
now I can hear you, but I cannot see you. So
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can anyone?
I can hear Jason. Oh, it looks like he dropped off. Maybe he's gonna log back in.
You can move on to Chuck, I suppose.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah, Chuck, would you like to go? And then if Jason pops back in, we'll let him know that you're finished.
Okay.
Oh, wait, hold on. Jason, if you can hear us, we're going to let Chuck Smith make his introduction.
Okay, I'll start.
I think you're having bad reception. You're cutting in and out.
He can always use the dial-in phone number too, instead of trying to do it over his cell phone or computer, and use the actual phone line.
I think that's a good alternative. Jason, if you can hear us, on the instructions in the email, there was a phone dial-in. I'm not sure if you're having bandwidth issues.
Let's let Chuck do his 2 minutes while Jason works out his technical issues.
That's fine. Thank you. Sorry about that, Chuck.
No, it's okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chuck Smith. Obviously, I'm running for Attorney General of Virginia. I'm running on the rights of the people, beginning with the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, God rights, gun rights, open carry rights, stand your ground in your own home rights. For me, the Second Amendment is personal. It's personal because it's a part of the Constitution. When I teach the Constitution, I always say that there is no universe in which the Constitution of the United States, indeed its Second Amendment, does not exist. There's no circumstance, no time. The Second Amendment exists. Our right to bear arms exists in wet weather, in warm weather, in the dark, in the night. It exists if there are shootings. It exists if there are killings. Unfortunately, it exists if there are disasters. It exists always and at all times. For that reason, I do not believe there is room for a red flag, one gun a month. There's no room for having our Second Amendment rights depend on the city or county that we believe in or that we belong to. And I don't even think there's room for people who even think about creating Second Amendment red flag laws where the Second Amendment takes a backseat. As a Marine, as a Navy JAG, as a lawyer that's practiced law for 41 years, which incidentally is longer than anyone in this race, and indeed longer than the incumbent, longer than anyone who's ever run for this office, I believe the Constitution is foremost, and I believe our Second Amendment rights are also foremost. That's who I am, that's who I've been. And it's a take no prisoners thing for me. If you create a red flag law, even though it doesn't get passed, that to me is a disaster. And I think we should stand against that, not just for ourselves, but for our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Jason, are we coming through clear?
Hopefully this works through. Can you hear me?
Yep, now we can hear you. So you want to make your 2-minute introduction?
Apologies, I have trouble operating heavy equipment. Listen, ultimately, this issue isn't, the media sometimes thinks this is about the Second Amendment. It's not that, it's about liberty. It's about ultimately the fact that our rights are not dependent upon some politician in Richmond or some politician in Washington, D.C. It's ultimately, our rights come from God. They're individual rights that can't be taken from government. And this is very, very personal for me, given the fact that if you know the Miara's name, it's Cuban. And anybody who studied what happened in that country is literally the first thing every autocratic regime always tries to do is disarm its population, because ultimately it's about trust. It's about the fact that in so many dark areas around the world, The government doesn't trust its population to be armed. And that's the opposite of what our country has been since our founding. But we have right now a attorney general and a governor and liberal politicians in Richmond that have complete misplaced priorities. They're anti-law enforcement, they're anti-gun, but they're pro-felon. So at the same time, they're doing everything they can to keep the doors to our schools closed, but the doors to our prison open. They're also doing everything they can to disarm the population. And so we're having this great discussion, as we often have in this country, about the Second Amendment and gun violence. And the point I always like to make is gun ownership in America has more than doubled in the last 2 decades. But gun violence in my hometown of Virginia Beach per capita is in 1964 levels. Because literally what you have seen is you have gun ownership at the highest rates it's ever been, but gun violence is at a 2, 3, 4 decade low. Why is that? That's the opposite of what the media would say, right? The media would think more guns in the hands of the population mean more gun violence. Reality is it's been the opposite. Here's what's happened. You've had great leaders in the past, like George Allen, that have supported parole abolition, have kept violent criminals off the street. When you keep violent criminals off the street, those are the people that are using guns in the commission of felony. Gun violence goes down. It happens every single time you do it. And now the opposite's happening. They're doing everything they can to get violent criminals back on the street. We know gun violence is going to go up. And instead of going after the felons, what are they going to do? They're going to go after the innocent Second Amendment who's never committed a crime in their life, Second Amendment individual that possesses a firearm that has done nothing wrong. But we saw this past session, which I voted against all of this legislation, that literally wanted to criminalize Second Amendment liberties. They literally said because of
time has expired.
Okay, we'll continue this on in the next question, I guess.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. So the timer will be behind Ed. It will be for 60 seconds. So each question, we're going to start with Leslie again for the questions. And then the second question will go to Jason first and we'll filter through. And I kind of let the cat out of the bag before the introductions, but the first question is, are you a VCDL member? So Leslie, you have a minute. I think you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. I am not a VCDL member, and to be honest with you, I am a concealed carry permit holder, and I have, I obviously support all of the work you folks have been doing. I'm very, very well aware of it. Probably just comes down to simply to how many organizations and issues I've belonged to and advocated for, and I'm very well and familiar with, and have met Philip Van Cleef at our great events in Chesterfield as well, but no, I'm not currently a member.
Okay, thanks. Jason, 1 minute.
No, I'm not, but I'm a member of the NRA. I'm a concealed carry holder. And when I was a prosecutor, I saw firsthand how critical it was that people had the ability to defend themselves and their family. Because ultimately that right comes from you, and it comes from God. It doesn't come from any member of government. It's so, as somebody who literally has had threats in their past made against my family, I know ultimately, as my friend who is in law enforcement said, the average response time when you make a 911 call in Virginia Beach for an officer to actually arrive at your home is going to be 7 minutes. It's going to take about 30 seconds for somebody to break down the door to your home if they want to do harm to yourself or your family. And so what the Second Amendment means is I'm not going to be dependent upon government to protect myself or my family. I'm going to be able to use my God-given right to protect my wife and my 3 daughters and my family. And so I think it's absolutely critical. So I understand this issue because literally I've had threats made against my family before in the past, and I will always, always protect that Second Amendment right so other people can exercise their own cherished rights to protect their own family.
Great, thank you, Jason. And Chuck, 1 minute. Are you VCDL member?
I believe the question is, am I a VCDL member? Yes, I am. If I recall correctly, I received the endorsement from the VCDL in the last election cycle. Yes, I am a concealed carry person, and yes, I have participated, to my knowledge, in every single VCDL event and rally that we've had, perhaps in the last 6 years.
Okay, and for clarification, it's VCDL-PAC that does endorsements. So VCDL doesn't endorse, they're not a political organization. So it is the PAC. If they've endorsed in the past, it's always been the PAC.
Yeah, and I, just by clarification, it was my understanding at that time that in order to receive the PAC's endorsement, I had to be a member of the VCDL.
Yes, we have that as a requirement for endorsement, at least since I've been on, and from the former Chairman Bob Sattler. So, okay, well, thank you, Chuck. The next question we have, will you publicly support legislation to repeal the law that allows localities to restrict the carrying or possession of firearms by peaceful citizens in recreation centers, libraries, parks, permitted events, or other local government buildings and facilities? And this first goes to Jason.
Yes, because what you've literally had, and you create a two-tiered system that's created complete uncertainty for gun owners. But think about it. If I'm a gun owner in Richmond and I want to go visit my friend and go to the shooting range in Virginia Beach, and in the interim, I pass through Hampton or Newport News and I stop at any of the facilities that were just mentioned, I've suddenly violated a law. I'm suddenly a felon. And what's worse is these city councils can literally put something on their agenda, and then 1 week later, you can go on the internet and say, I'm going to be going down to Virginia Beach to do shooting, go in and say, let me look at the localities, the rules and the localities that they pass through. And next thing you know, in that interim time, they've had a meeting, the city council's passed an ordinance, and suddenly before you know it, you're a felon. And it's exactly the lack of uniformity that has created this patchwork nightmare for so many gun owners. And what it's done is it's criminalized the innocent, law-abiding gun owners. And at the same time, they're not spending any time going after the criminals that are literally using firearms and felonies. Are not prosecuting them.
Great, thanks, Jason. Chuck?
Yes, so I don't think I need an explanation as to why I would do it. 100%, I'm in favor of enforcing the Constitution. With the Second Amendment, I believe I let the cat out of the bag early, and that is that there is no universe where the Second Amendment can be suspended. And so there's no reason for cities or counties to have different rules. There's no reason for the Commonwealth to have a rule against the Second Amendment. So yes, I would 100% be in favor of lifting any restriction on the Second Amendment.
Great, thank you. The next question, we're going to start with Chuck, so you're up again. Do you believe
Did Leslie get a chance to answer that question?
Oh, I'm sorry, Leslie. I keep messing up when it comes to you. I apologize, Leslie. Go, please.
Yes.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
that's fine. And my answer is very simple also. I mean, my answer is yes. I mean, there is just, the Second Amendment, if you're going to uphold the Second Amendment, you're going to uphold the Second Amendment. And every time you put one, restriction on it, you just keep whittling away on basically that constitutional right. And so, these random determinations of you can't carry here, you can't carry there. I mean, again, it's eroding the Second Amendment, and I stand completely behind the Second Amendment. So.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this next question, I'm going to check off who's spoken so that I don't leap over anyone again. So my apologies. The next question starts with Chuck. The question is, do you believe the Second Amendment is meant to protect citizens from a government turned tyrannical and allows individuals to own semi-automatic firearms?
Yes. 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 100% yes.
Okay.
And look, here's the idea here, and maybe I don't need to say this 5, 6, or 7 more times, but the notion that we have a Constitution and the Second Amendment is, in my opinion, the most important right in that Constitution. There is no universe where any suspensions can occur. The founders intended for people to be able to defend themselves. And we're not defending ourselves against animals or dogs. We're defending ourselves against a government either that has grown too large or government that has usurped too much of the citizens' power. The Constitution specifically says, we the people. And when the government takes that power away, the citizens, I believe, have an obligation under its Second Amendment, particularly where it says that this amendment shall not be infringed.
Great, thank you, Chuck. Okay, so now we're on to Leslie. I didn't ask you over this time, so I apologize. Do you believe the Second Amendment is meant to protect citizens from a government turned tyrannical and allows individuals to own semi-automatic firearms?
And the answer is yes, absolutely. And I mean, the Constitution specifically says, it's the right to bear arms. It's the right to keep and bear arms. And so again, every single time we chop away at the Second Amendment, we're as little or as large as it is, it's taking away, folks' constitutional God-given rights. And so the answer is yes.
Great, thank you. And Jason, do you need the question again?
No, because it's exactly why the Second Amendment exists. It guarantees the first, and it's actually designed to protect your liberties. I mean, listen, I tell this to high school groups, they say this all the time. What separates us from most of the people that woke up this morning on this planet is this right here, that knock on the door. When you and I hear that, we don't think anything of it. We're not nervous. But for most of the people that woke up this morning, I don't care if you're in Cuba, I don't care if you're in North Korea, I don't care if you're in China. When you hear this, it means something very, very different. It means the government's there to take you away because you've worshiped God in a manner you disagree with, or you've spoken out against the government, or you've decided to exercise your God-given rights to defend yourself or your family. This is very personal for me because my mother heard that knock on the door in Cuba during Bay of Pigs. Castro's security forces literally showed up in her house in the middle of the night. And what was the first question they asked? Where are your guns? That's the first thing every single socialist communist regime from Cuba to Venezuela to North Korea will always do. They will always disarm their populations. So that's why the Second Amendment's there. It's exactly there to protect you from tyranny and your individual right to defend yourself and your family.
Thank you, Jason. The fourth question, we're going to start with Leslie. The fourth question is, will you discourage prosecution and seizure of firearms under red flag laws, which provides no help to someone having a mental health crisis and leaves that person still able to harm themselves or others, and work to overturn this unconstitutional and unnecessary law?
Well, I have to say, I don't believe in red flag laws. I don't believe in restrictions like that. I don't believe that, we saw one of the most horrific, awful mental health crises to occur in Chesterfield County when this young man in a mental health crisis picked up an axe. And if any of you read about that, and I'm sure most of you close by knew, what the destruction he did to his parents with an axe. I mean, folks that are in mental health crises and things like that, are going to find weapons or find issues. We don't need red flag laws that are going to erode, again, Second Amendment protections that people are entitled to.
Great, thank you. Jason, do you need the question again?
No, I know what it is. Listen, I voted against a red flag bill. It was HB 674. It's currently the law in the book. I voted against it January 30th. I voted against it March 2nd. You're exactly right about the mental health. Over 60% of all gun deaths are done by suicide. And yes, I introduced a piece of legislation that has been mischaracterized as somehow red flag, and this is what it did. The longstanding law in Virginia for decades, well before I was even born, is that if you are adjudicated mentally insane, you can't possess a firearm or buy a firearm. I had a dear friend who's a gun collector who came to me and said, listen, we need to revamp this. And so this is what I did. Number one, I said, if you lie about somebody's mental health, it's a class 6 felony. We need that in Virginia. 2, if you actually adjudicated mentally insane, that standard should be clear and convincing evidence. And 3, if that happens, you shouldn't have to turn over your firearm to police. You should be able to allow yourself to turn over your firearm to a family member or a friend. And there is a great article in the Blue Elephant with the headline, No, Miaras did not introduce a red flag law. And I voted against the red flag law in Virginia. People can look it up, and I'm happy to talk more about it if I have more time.
Great, thank you, Jason. Chuck, you're filling out this question. Go ahead.
Yes. Listen, I think my good friend Jason may have been misinformed when he created House Bill 4031, which would have taken rights away from people because they were feeling ill or they had been declared mentally ill or something of that sort. We look at the Second Amendment as if it exists in a vacuum. It doesn't. The Second Amendment exists inside of the Constitution, not too far from what we call the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment says that nothing, absolutely nothing, shall be taken away from you until you have a notice and a hearing. If my good friend Jason really believes what he says, then he really doesn't believe in the Constitution, because at least under HB 4031, I believe that's the one that he created, he designed, it takes away the right under Virginia Code, under the Virginia Code, and gives it back if the person has been declared recovered. I would submit, and I hope Jason would, I hope all of my opponents would revisit that and consider whether that is the appropriate constitutional restriction.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. The next question, we're starting with Jason. Yes, we are starting with Jason. Firearm owners have been victimized by law enforcement on occasion, having their guns seized during traffic stops for no legitimate reason, having the serial numbers of their guns checked to see if they were stolen, and even arrested for having a loaded firearm in a secure container, which is legal in Virginia. Will you encourage the education of law enforcement on respecting and upholding the rights of legal gun owners and disciplinary action for those that abuse their power?
Absolutely correct. I mean, and these people realize that these are valuable commodities. As my friend that came to me about the situation, he didn't invest in gold. He didn't invest in stocks. He invested in firearms. And it's amazing how much money you can make when there's a Democratic president. And so exactly right. The police should not be able to confiscate this. And if they are not returning your property, if they're doing something untoward, oftentimes you'll see cases where the police either fail to properly secure it. If they return it, it's damage. And these are oftentimes these are collectibles, but they're investments. For a lot of people, they're literally some of their hard-earned dollars are into their firearms. So absolutely, police should be held responsible, and you should be able to, instead of having the police seize a firearm from you, you should be able to give it to a loved one or a family member. And that's, you want to empower the individual. And while I will always stand with law enforcement, always stand with our boys that wear the shield, at the end of the day, you also realize they're going to be bad actors. They're still actors of the government. And if they're damaging your personal property, particularly if they're not returning it, they need to be held responsible for it.
Okay, thank you. Chuck, do you need the question again?
Yes, please.
Firearm owners have been victimized by law enforcement on occasion, having their guns seized during traffic stops for no legitimate reason, having the serial numbers of their guns checked to see if they were stolen, and even arrested for having a loaded firearm in a secure container, which is legal in Virginia. Will you encourage the education of law enforcement on respecting and upholding the rights of legal gun owners and disciplinary action for those who abuse their power?
The answer is yes. Listen, we're running for the top law enforcement job of the Commonwealth, and we should be the embodiment of the Constitution, the embodiment of the Second Amendment, of the 17 responsibilities of the Attorney General. Number one on the board is upholding the Constitution. As I indicated in the beginning, there is no universe where the Constitution is not enforced. It doesn't take a lunch break, doesn't take a spring break. It is always on, always in force. There is no authority for a violation of the words shall not be infringed. And so, yes, I will support the education, but I think as people seeking the highest law enforcement job of the state, we should represent that the Constitution stands whether or not there's danger, whether or not there is a reason to take guns under the Code of Virginia or under any other code. We should support the Second Amendment at all times. Thank
you, Chuck. Leslie, do you need the question again?
No, I'm good, but thank you. And the answer is, yes, we should absolutely be supporting the Second Amendment. And I have to tell you, what we've seen in this last year, and I think that, what we're seeing every day just indicates that, nobody is standing taller for their men and women in blue than, I've done as on the Board of Supervisors in Chesterfield. But I will tell you, I think that one of the things we're missing sometimes is making certain that all of our men in blue have this and women in blue have the same opportunities for training and education so that we don't find ourselves conflicted in situations like this. So there's very clear training on what, a citizen's constitutional rights are and how they should be approaching situations like this. So yes, you're always going to have, bad actors out there, but sometimes we have to take responsibility too if these folks haven't had the opportunity and the adequacy of training. And not everybody's held to that same standard of training when it comes to our men and women in blue. So I think this sometimes comes down to a basic training aspect. And as Attorney General, I think that's a great role to play.
Great, thank you, Leslie. The next question starts with Chuck. Chuck, many laws have been passed with the stated purpose of increasing firearm safety. Many of these laws only restrict the rights of peaceful gun owners and do nothing to enhance safety. Do you support the repeal of so-called gun-free zones, which are frequently targeted by criminals as a defense-free, victim-rich environment?
The answer is yes. We've seen throughout the country, indeed throughout the Commonwealth and other states as well, where gun-free zones have sometimes most of the violence, where the criminals know that no one's going to be armed in gun-free zones, so they arm themselves. I think, again, as we seek the highest law enforcement job in the state, we need to represent that the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. And there should be no circumstance where either law enforcement or the Virginia Code or any other act is utilized to somehow backdoor into restricting the Second Amendment. I want to say also here in the 18 seconds that I have, we need to stop making excuses for people who violate the Second Amendment or violate the Constitution. We need to stop giving leeway. We need to stand up for our rights, and we need to get that point across that you cannot continue to take the citizens' rights away that were guaranteed by the Constitution.
Thank you, Chuck. And I want to apologize for my dogs barking while you were talking.
That's okay. That's okay.
Leslie, do you need the question again? You're next.
No, I think I'm good, but thank you. And the answer is absolutely the same, and I believe that becomes yes, because, the McDonald case, the US Supreme Court case tells us that self-defense is the central component of, the Second Amendment. We're going to create these gun-free zones, which again, certainly the criminals, they're smart enough to recognize that puts any other citizen in a compromised position. We should never be, put in a compromised position. We should never be put in a position that is going to allow our Second Amendment rights to be compromised. It's really pretty, it's pretty basic to me. And all of this just makes the entirety of the Second Amendment, you either stand behind the Second Amendment or you don't. And when you start eroding it, you're not standing behind the citizens' rights and the God-given rights of the Second Amendment.
Thank you, Leslie. Jason, do you need the question again?
No, I could tell you that, when I was a prosecutor, the things that the ones that scare you are those defendants that you realize are the legitimate sociopaths. Most criminals are just, they're crimes of opportunity. A lot of times they're bad people. But the ones that terrify you, the ones you're in the room, they're sociopaths. They view you no different than if they stepped on a bug. Those individuals too often are literally looking for those opportunities to commit those mass casualty events. They're looking for those gun-free zones because they know at the end of the day, they want to be in an area they can create the most carnage and the most mayhem and the most death in the shortest amount of time. But then ultimately, before a good guy with a gun, i.e. a police officer, could show up. And so that's a whole reason why the Second Amendment is there to protect you, is for you having in those moments. Where, as I said, as my friend who's a police officer said, the average response time in my hometown is about 7 minutes for an officer to get to your house. I'm not going to wait for an officer to get to my house to defend my family. But you have these areas where these killers, these psychopaths that literally want to commit human carnage, they're going to purposely target them for a reason.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, the next question, we're going to start with Leslie. Will you submit amicus briefs in future cases opposing anti-gun proposals and in support of the rights of Virginia's peaceful gun owners?
Absolutely. I think that's a role of the Attorney General, and I think that's one of the roles we've seen missing on so many issues with our current Attorney General. The current Attorney General has really become, as I noted earlier, the attorney for the party. And so all of the constitutional rights of our citizens have been in jeopardy. But they start, with the fundamental Second Amendment rights. And when you see all of these erosions of our Second Amendment rights, amicus briefs are probably the easiest portion. We need to be standing up and outright suing to uphold our citizens' constitutional rights, but certainly joining with others in an amicus brief as well to outline the real aspects and, to support the Supreme Court's, again, the McDonald case from the Supreme Court is very, very clear about this. It seems to me that there are many, many challenges that could be brought in Virginia right now.
Thanks, Leslie. Next is Jason. I don't think you need the question again, do you?
No, listen, I think this you submit those amicus briefs because you see how closely our Second Amendment rights are. The Heller decision, the District of Columbia versus Heller, was only a 5-4 decision. That's the Supreme Court case. Anthony Scalia, one of my Supreme Court heroes, affirmed it's an individual right. It is not a collective right, which always infuriated me when we had these debates. All of these First Amendments of the Constitution were individual rights. They were not in any way seen as a collective right. but that's what the left and the liberals would always say that it was. But you submit those amicus briefs because that Heller decision was only a 5-4 decision. That should show you how quickly the Supreme Court can turn. I think that this, if we had another case of similar right now, I think we would have probably 5-4 or 6-3. But you want to be that voice. And if anything, reason why I'm running for Attorney General wants to be the voice for those people that nobody has their back. They don't feel like government has their back. They don't feel like the media has their back. They don't feel like pop culture has their back. I want to be Attorney General that has a voice for them, that they feel like they have their back. And I'll always be able to do that on the Second Amendment.
Thank you, Jason. And Chuck, do you need the question again?
No, I'm fine. 100%, yes. But I would go further. I would file the original case for actions that occurred in Virginia or for actions that involved Virginia citizens. It's not enough for me, I think, to sit around and wait to file the amicus brief for those other attorneys generals or those other cases that have been filed by other people, and then to come in second. I think for matters that infringe upon the Second Amendment inside of Virginia or that affect Virginia citizens, it is my obligation to file those suits in the original case immediately. And I think that's what the people are looking for in an attorney general. I think Leslie said it best. People are looking for their attorney general to come prepared to protect them, to defend them, and to defend their constitutional rights. That's what an attorney general will do. That's what I will do.
Thank you, Chuck. The next question, Jason, you're going to start. The question is, a person may openly carry a firearm in Virginia without any special permissions from the state. But if that same person wants to wear a coat that covers their pistol, they must pay a tax and obtain a permit from the government. Do you support constitutional permitless carry and the repeal of the statewide ban on concealed carry?
Yes, because I think it's a little bit silly that the idea, whether you, to your point, the example you use, whether I mean, I'm a concealed weapons carry holder. I have a Glock. It seems absurd whether it's going to matter whether I have my suit jacket on or whether I carry it in the small of my back. And so I think this is a classic case of government overreach and government regulation. And I like to say that good intentions does not guarantee good results. That's one of our biggest problems in government today. And when I was a legislator, I met with Phil Van Cleve and a lot of others. I always say, you know, it's a 3-part test. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Does your bill actually solve the problem? And 3, what's the unintended consequences? There's this patchwork, and we've seen this past year in 2020 and 2021 in the General Assembly, a bill after bill after bill that not just on guns, you can pick on about every issue you can imagine. And that's my always response. Good intentions does not guarantee good results. And there's too few people in government that have any common sense. They may have knowledge, they have no common sense.
Thank you, Jason. Chuck, you're next. Do you need the question again?
No. Yes, I would support that because I believe that, again, our rights shall not be infringed. But even to the extent that this may go above our rights, I think the encroachment is unnecessary. Listen, we know the members of our General Assembly work hard. We get that. We understand that there are things that the citizens want that they should be doing, perhaps that they're not doing. I would encourage, certainly as Attorney General, that laws that are going to be passed by the General Assembly at least touch on some type of common sense or some type of constitutional basis. Otherwise, I will deem them and write opinions that they are unconstitutional. I think the citizens are looking for not just common sense laws, but they're looking for laws that don't impact on their rights. And to the extent that someone's coat or shirt overlaps their right to bear arms, I think that's an unlawful infringement.
Thank you, Chuck. Haley, do you need the question? I mean, Leslie, do you need the question again?
No, I'm good. And I actually completely agree. I mean, for me, I have to admit that I really, I didn't grow up in a family that was armed or had guns. And so I really sought this out on my own, did classes and really have engaged with our law enforcement community and other folks to really learn more about this. And to be honest with you, one of my first questions was, and so why do I have a permit for me to put this in my purse versus for me to just, so why do I have a permit does this make any sense to me? So I can just walk down the street and carry it in my palm. And then if I want to put it just someplace that makes sense for it to be secure. So, I mean, sometimes I wonder, if these folks passing these laws, as has been noted before, really think through any of the common sense parts of this. But again, it's infringing on Second Amendment rights. And, it just has no even basis in fact that makes sense.
Thanks, Leslie. The next question is going to start with Chuck. Chuck, Virginia shares concealed handgun permit information with all 50 states. Because of that, when one of Virginia's 700,000 CHP holders goes to a state that does not recognize Virginia's permit, like Maryland, some permit holders may have been the victims of harassment by law enforcement. Some of those states have even considered the fact that the driver has a concealed handgun permit as probable cause to search a vehicle. Will you support changes to the law that would only disseminate the CHP information to states that recognize the Virginia permit? Disseminate. I'm sorry, I tripped over that word. So the question is, will you support changes to the law that would only disseminate the CHP information to states that recognize the Virginia permit?
I would go further than that. Those are rights that are affecting Virginia citizens. And as Attorney General, it's my job not just to defend the Constitution, but defend the rights of Virginia citizens. And so we have to remember that the Second Amendment is not a Virginia law. It is not another state's law. It is a United States constitutional law, which means it applies throughout the land, which means it is the supreme law of the land. And any state that would not allow or that would restrict the constitutional rights of a Virginia citizen, then it would be my job to take that particular state or to take that particular individual in that particular state to task and hold them accountable. And that is exactly what I will do. Again, there's no universe in where the Second Amendment does not apply, where the Constitution is not in force.
Thank you, Chuck. Second is Leslie. Do you need the question again?
No, I'm good. And I think Patricia put it in the chat for us to follow on it. So I appreciate that. So I have to say, yes, I mean, again, right, the Second Amendment rights don't stop at the border of Virginia. The Second Amendment rights of our citizens don't stop because they're going to be traveling. And if anything, this world, as we know it, has become global. And yet here we are, bordered on a state border over the most fundamental of our rights, our God-given constitutional rights. And we have to be worried about protecting ourselves or just carrying across state lines. So I think that advocacy needs to be even louder and broader than that. And I think that, there needs to be a unification of conversation between attorneys general and other states and talk about how this is impacting the citizens of Virginia on a complete basis of, as they're visiting or transferring out of the state. I mean, it's completely nonsensical and against their constitutional rights.
Thank you, Leslie. Jason?
Yeah, I mean, this whole debate reminds me of when, Mark Herring went out arbitrarily. I like to say Mark Herring is Virginia's Eric Holder. He's nothing but far left extremist. And he essentially tried to say there's thousands of Virginia concealed weapons permit holders that are crossing over the border from Virginia into North Carolina. They can't have reciprocity. They can't be recognized. And as I said before, he's going to turn literally thousands of law-abiding innocent Virginians suddenly into felons overnight. So anything that would set up a situation where Second Amendment, those that want to exercise their God-given Second Amendment rights are going to be treated like second-class citizens. I mean, listen, I will always back the blue, but listen, we have to hold the police to a high standard. Ultimately, they're one of the few actors in our society that can use force or have a monopoly of the use of force, except in certain situations. If they're using CHP information in other states to somehow stop Virginians, law-abiding Virginians in other states, either harass them or violate their constitutional rights against unreasonable search and seizure, then absolutely it needs to stop and stop now.
Thank you, Jason. This next question is short, but it is really, pardon the pun, loaded. So the first person to answer it is Leslie. How will you protect Virginia citizens from the federal gun grab that's coming?
Well, I can tell you, and this federal gun grab, one of the things for any of us that do own guns, and I mean, the federal gun grab, the first step of this is they're restricting ammo, right? You can't even buy ammo. So to be able to even be armed and to have your gun, it is just amazing to me. But, standing up and challenging Second Amendment rights again. This federal gun grab is an exact impact on our God-given Second Amendment rights. And so you're going to stand up if you need to go for an injunction in a federal court, you're going to go for an injunction. If you need to take that all the way to the Supreme Court, we're going all the way to the Supreme Court. Because again, this is about the citizens of Virginia and their constitutional rights. It's not about the aspects of Mark Herring, just pandering to the party.
Thank you, Leslie. Jason, you're up next.
This shows exactly why there's a big difference between a Republican attorney general and a conservative attorney general. And conservative attorney generals will be not afraid to go into court and file and challenge when people are violating their Second Amendment rights. But listen, this shows you how misplaced priorities you have right now, both in DC and in Richmond, where they're not going after the criminals and felons, they're going after law-abiding citizens. To show you how backwards it is, Project Exile was a very successful program that started in the late 90s by Bob McDonald with the U.S. Attorney's Office, said if you use a firearm in the commission of a felony, it's an automatic 5-year mandatory minimum. It drastically lowered gun violence in Richmond because you go after the bad guys. What did Mark Herring did? The successor program to that, he refused federal money to continue to prosecute the bad guys because the Trump White House required that if you pick up somebody who's here as an illegal immigrant who's using a firearm illegally, somebody who's here illegally using a firearm and a felon, he did not want to turn those people over to ICE as the Trump administration was requiring. And so he'd rather let these people out back on the streets and prosecute them. It was shameful, absolutely shameful.
Thank you, Jason. Chuck?
You see, I believe the right to bear arms is a right to do just that, the right to bear arms. And that presupposes more than just the device itself. It presupposes more than just the weapon. It also presupposes the arms that come with it. I think restrictions on arms, the ammo that comes with it. I think restriction on the ammo is also a restriction that is not allowed by the Constitution because it affects the right to bear arms. And so not only would I as Leslie indicated, intervene, I would file the suit in the first place if it affects Virginia citizens. I would take the Biden administration to court. I would take he's not going to be our governor, but whoever our governor is, or if the General Assembly enacts that law, I would take them to court. I think it's my responsibility. If I believe that again, the Constitution doesn't take a lunch break, it doesn't sleep, it's always in force, and it is always with us. The people's right to bear arms always exists.
Thank you, Chuck. The next question, we're starting with Jason. As a means of promoting real firearm safety through education on safe use and handling, do you support age-appropriate firearms safety training in schools beginning in elementary school?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that's frustrated me with the way the media portrays, the NRA for years has done child safety and age-appropriate firearms and firearm safety training for young children. And I think that's absolutely critical, particularly at some of our rural areas where it is literally a way of life. And instead they've been demonized in a way that has been, and I always step back and I marvel and say, how many lives have we saved? We know so many, you always hear the tragic stories of the gun deaths of the children that aren't familiar with the use of how to handle a firearm. They either at a friend's house, they find one, they discover one. And instead of, and this is exactly the case of good intentions don't mean good results. Actually, this is bad intentions leading to bad results, where they're literally limiting. The best way to fight bad information is good information. So shouldn't everybody, I don't care where you are in the political spectrum, shouldn't you desire that young people have some basic training that if they ever encounter a firearm, they know how to handle it safely instead of some of these tragic deaths that we see?
Yes, thank you, Jason. Next, Chuck.
So what the government does in many cases, it takes a obviously innocent act, and then it incorporates it into a law. I think voluntary training is good. I think anyone that wants to submit to that training is good. You know, I like the saying, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And sometimes people kill people accidentally. So training would help them. Training would help those people. But what would a government do? They would take that training and make it mandatory in order to own a weapon, in order to possess a weapon, in order to have a concealed weapons permit. And so I think, once again, there should be no restriction. Shall not be infringed is the way to go. If people want the voluntary training, if they want to avail themselves of all the expertise that's being provided, let's have at it.
Great, thank you, Chuck. Leslie?
Well, I completely agree, but I have to say, you know, it concerns me that this would be another way in which the government would get involved. And I don't want to see the government involved in this type of a, you know, firearm safety training, because I don't want there to be a negative connotation to the aspect of, you know, look, we're only doing this, you know, we're doing this in a way that the federal government tends, at least under the current administration, to oversee this. I think it should be, as Chuck mentioned, I think it should be voluntary. I think it should be encouraged from a safety perspective, because, you know, you never know at what point in time or where somebody may, even a child, come upon a firearm. The more informed we are, it's just like anything else. The more information you have, the more informed you are, the more comfortable you're going to be in that situation, the better you're going to be able to respond. And that doesn't matter if you're a child, if you're a young adult, or if you're an adult, but it makes you much more familiar, and it also puts you in a position to better make decisions as you become a young adult about these issues.
Thank you, Leslie. This is kind of a related question, and it'll first go to Chuck. Do you support expansion? And by this, we mean funding akin to other sports of opportunities for shooting sports, rifle, shotgun, pistol, air gun, and high schools. Do you support funding of Olympic training for firearm sports like you would for gymnastics or other Olympic events?
Yeah, I don't know how many times you can ask me the question in a different way. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe in the Constitution. Shall not be infringed, and the people's right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Yes, I support anything that does not infringe upon the rights of citizens to bear arms. And just so you don't think that I'm out here in the weeds, the founders knew what they were doing, and they gave it to us. I'm sorry, they gave the Constitution to us, and it guaranteed our rights because they wanted us to be able to defend ourselves. But at the end of the day, I think what government has done is they've taken that around and seems to allow the Virginia Code or the state's code to place restrictions. I don't think there should be any restrictions. And I think citizens can do for themselves as far as getting the necessary training, getting the necessary advice, getting the necessary information. But I don't think there should be any restrictions whatsoever.
Thank you, Chuck. Leslie, do you need the question again?
No, I'm good. And I have to tell you, I probably am probably the closest to this. I'm the best. So I went to West Virginia University. We have a nationally recognized rifle team. I mean, even years ago when I was there, it was a top sport. It was a very, very competitive sport. They were always nationally ranked, normally coming in #1. And to see then how that sport expanded to include women also while I was there. And I still am always curious to follow them. You know, trust me, they didn't start shooting in college. You know, they shot competitively. It just wasn't through necessarily sponsored high school sporting teams, though some were in West Virginia. But these students came from across the country as well. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating, and allows people with different skills, you know, again, to bring their you know, to bring that into a social and a competitive environment. And absolutely, we should be supporting that.
Thank you, Leslie. Jason?
I mean, listen, I think anything that listen, I don't care if it's a shooting team or a golf team or a basketball team. One thing we know this is we're the most connected and disconnected we've ever been in society. Over 50% of Americans don't even know the name of their neighbor. They're really good at being on these little devices, but they're not really good at interacting with people. And then we've seen that trickle down with our young people. We have an ADD a crisis right now of our young people. So any sport, I don't care what it is, that teaches you patience, organization, teamwork, goal setting, that there's something larger than yourself, it should be encouraged. And so, yeah, I think you should expand those opportunities. I know people that have been on shooting. I was not on a shooting team in high school, but I've had friends that have been. And it is no different. The way it's been described to me as being on a larger sports team. And heaven knows it'd be great to have our kids off their computer devices and out actually being human beings.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, this question is going to start with Leslie. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution states the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. The anti-freedom politicians are constantly threatening our Fourth Amendment when it comes to guns. How would you protect citizens from this threat?
Well, I think this goes back again to not being afraid to stand up and challenge this in court. I mean, these are fundamental rights. You know, our Fourth Amendment, just like our Second Amendment, is a fundamental right that belongs to the citizens. And any kind of seizures, any kind of actions that are threatening the constitutional rights of our citizens. I just think that here in Virginia, it's been so long since we've seen an attorney general that has stood up for anything on behalf of our citizens that, we all feel so basically just beaten down by this. We feel like, what is the point that these folks can take away our rights, and what are we going to do? It's because our attorney general has not in any way stood up to say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this into the courts. We're going to stand up for our citizens. We're going to challenge any actions like this. It's the reason I'm running. I mean, we're all just in a posture right now that is, we're at risk.
Thanks, Leslie. Jason, you're next.
Yeah, I mean, listen, as someone who is passionate about history, I mean, the origins of this really dates back to the general writ that the British king used to issue that would violate Englishmen's laws, and then they didn't transfer that to colonial America. And so literally, if you look at one of the great discussions, both in the early Massachusetts Constitution and the Virginia Declaration of Rights, this general prohibition that literally emerged into the Fourth Amendment was there at our founding. And it's what I've tried to tell young people all the time is that our founders were as concerned about monarchy as they were about anarchy. And when it comes to the monarchy, they were literally going into people's homes. And so that standard should be critical as we move forward about these unreasonable searches and seizures. And what has happened is we've seen in case after case is people have chipped away at your Fourth Amendment rights. I mean, it seems like liberal judges like to chip away at everybody's rights, but particularly on our Second Amendment rights and our Fourth Amendment rights, they keep chipping away at what is unreasonable searches and seizures. And it is, and we have to have those attorney generals willing to defend that, particularly in the 21st century age, also as well with the amount of information going over with technology.
Thanks, Jason. Chuck?
So for the first time in these questions, we see the interplay between the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment. And as I was reminding, at least in one of my answers, my good friend Jason, here is, I guess, the perfect situation where you have the right that says shall not be infringed. And the Virginia Code comes along and says, well, if you're ill, we'll take it for a little while. And then when you get better, we'll give it back. And I'm telling you, you can't do that under the Fifth Amendment because the Fifth Amendment says you can't take it in the first place. The Fourth Amendment says if you're going to take it, then it has to be by probable cause. Where's the probable cause to remove something from my house? Where's the probable cause to remove something from my car? You don't have it because the Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. Again, the Fifth Amendment says you can't take it in case I'm ill or sick. Where's your right to take it in the first place? So I'm just saying, I know perhaps he meant well, but you have a guaranteed Second Amendment right to bear arms. That's the country we have. That's the Commonwealth we have, and we need to function under that. As Attorney General, I'll make sure we do that.
Thank you, Chuck. We're going to start with Jason for the next question. From the official press release from the Office of Governor Northam, quote, during the 2021 General Assembly session, legislators approved a constitutional amendment that affirms the fundamental right to vote and automatically restores the civil rights of any individual upon completion of their sentence of incarceration. The constitutional amendment has to be passed again by the General Assembly in 2022 before going to a vote or referendum. Will you work to make the restoration of the right to keep and bear arms automatic as well?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you the inconsistency, the moral inconsistencies of what's going in Richmond right now, first with McAuliffe and then Northam. I mean, what they've basically done is they have this criminal first, victim last mindset in Richmond that's making Virginians less safe. And then ultimately they have two direct contradictory positions that are against each other. They're saying, we're going to restore your rights, so you have a right to vote, but we're not going to restore all your rights. Well, that's inherently contradictory. Now, the automatic restoration of rights for violent felons, I have opposed. I think there has to be a process. And one of the biggest reasons why is restitution is part of that. I'm a former prosecutor. I don't defend criminal felons. But it's critical to know that in so many of these cases, restitution is part of it. I've seen judges order restitution for rape victims for their counselors. And what's happened is you have felons that never paid restitution to their victims suddenly have their rights restored. And that's absolutely absurd. But if you're going to do it, restore all the rights. Don't do what the governor's tried to do.
Thank you, Jason. Chuck, you're next.
So there's been some comment about whether or not Chuck Smith is actually prosecuted. And it's been made by, I think, people generally who just did not have all the information. As a military prosecutor, and certainly as a prosecutor of federal cases in federal magistrate court, I often ran across times where the crime had been committed, the time had been done, the restoration the restoration had not been given, but the probation had been completed, and yet the individual still did not have their rights restored. They had to file a subsequent application. As a defense counsel, having practiced law for nearly 38 years, as a defense counsel, I've seen situations where people have to actually apply to get their rights back. I think the restoration of rights should be automatic. As Attorney General, I will do what I can to make sure courts, when they issue these sentences, recognize when the sentences have been completed and that the rights are restored automatically. If there's more to be done, the court needs to put that in its sentence order. I would have said more, but I ran out of time. I can't hear.
Apologies.
Okay.
Thank you, Chuck. Leslie?
Okay, thank you. Well, I agree with that. I mean, a court is ordering a sentence that is appropriate as to whatever that crime that has been committed, whatever the adjudication of the case is. If we as a society have determined that that felon has served their time, that felon is eligible for release, and don't even get me started on what's going on with the parole board, because that's a whole different circumstance where we're just releasing convicted felons without going through the procedural aspects. But the procedural aspects of reentry after serving time should involve, if we're going to restore rights, then they should all be restored. If we're saying you have met and done your time, you've done your duty, you've done everything you were required to do, we're going to turn you back out, we're going to allow you to become a citizen again, but we're not going to give you any rights that are due to every law-abiding citizen that now exists. This is, again, playing apples and oranges, playing, shoestrings. If it's abiding by if the felon has done everything the court ordered and is back out in society, they should have their rights restored.
Thank you, Leslie. This next question is a little long, so I'm going to have Pat paste it in the chat for you guys to read. The first person to answer is Chuck. The term ghost guns has been thrown around a lot to scare people into supporting a ban on people building their own firearms. The hype is that untraceable firearms are making it difficult to solve crimes. The reality is that traces rarely solve crimes or lead back to the criminal. At best, the trace will lead back to the rightful owner whose firearm was stolen. Current federal and state law does not prohibit people from building their own firearms for lawful personal use. This is a historic national right and has a rich history in this state. Do you believe that people should have the right to make their own guns as currently allowed under federal and state regulations?
So what you're saying is that the federal government at some level has enacted a law consistent with the Second Amendment to allow people to make guns. And at some level, the state government has corroborated in that and allow people to make guns. And so the law is that the law exists so that people can make guns. Yes, I would support that. I do not support people making anything for the purpose of committing a crime. I do not think that people who are about to commit a crime should have the right to have things, should have the tools of their crime. And I want to speak Spanish here, but in a way where it is hidden from the government. And so, although I think ghost guns present a problem for our law enforcement, I think a strict construction of the Second Amendment would allow them to do that.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. Leslie?
I also think a strict construction of the Second Amendment would allow them to do that. And I think that, you know, what we're really talking about is, you know, defining whether you're defining this as a gun, whether you're defining this as some kind of a weapon. I mean, some of these, you know, we're coming down now into the nuances of, you know, what exactly is a gun versus, you know, a different type of weapon versus some kind of firearm versus, I mean, again, you know, if the Second Amendment gives us the opportunity to use and bear arms for the purpose of self-defense, for the purpose of, you know, I don't think the federal government has the right to get into this nuanced aspect of did you make it or did you purchase it and how does that, you know, compare? You know, bottom line is, you know, it comes back to it's all fundamental under our Second Amendment rights.
Thanks, Leslie. Jason? You're on mute.
Sorry. At the end of the day, keep the laws the way it is. You don't need to add new laws. Only people getting criminalized are those innocent hobbyists, people that do this as part of their individual pursuit. And it seems absurd. And again, it just seems like they're trying to, so many of these gun laws are trying to burn down the house to kill some spiders. So I do want to use a balance of my time to address something I think is fundamentally important. It's previously said it seems like people are for the automatic restoration of rights for violent criminals. I'm not, because we've seen right now with this parole board, they let out people like Gregory Joyner, who abducted, raped, strangled, and murdered a 15-year-old girl, buried her in a shallow ditch. You have Vincent Martin, who was literally a cop killer, who committed multiple armed robberies out, and he was out last summer. He got out by this parole board. He was given life without the possibility of parole. He was asked if he had any regrets. He said no. So I sure as heck don't think that should be an automatic restoration of rights. I think they should do the way it's always been before these liberals took over. They petition the governor and they go through the process.
Thanks, Jason. Coming down to our last three questions. So we're in the final stretch here. Thank you. Everybody's been so great and patient. We're going to start with Leslie for this question. When the NICS system was developed and the requirement for background checks was enacted at the federal level, it was with the understanding that the private sales would be exempt. The purpose of this was to prevent a de facto gun registry and the threat of future mass confiscation of firearms. Do you support the repeal of Virginia's mandatory background checks on private sales? And will you discourage prosecution under this unconstitutional law?
And I think that, you know, the problem that happens with this too is let's just recognize that, you know, how many of these, the aspects of gun sales are happening as a result of this are not happening through any kind of, you know, are actually happening through private sales and aren't really being recorded and checked anyway. I mean, what this does is just promote that aspect of folks, dealing guns and working through this aspect of trying to make certain that there's not, I'm trying to think of the word for numbering on the guns. And, this aspect of, making sure that they can't trace guns. But we also look at this aspect of guns that are owned in generations and generations and passed down and, then can possibly fall into other hands or sold within families. I mean, this whole aspect of doing these background checks that are systematically holding things up seems to be not only unconstitutional, but definitely a violation of our Second Amendment.
Thanks, Leslie. Jason?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, all this is going to do is this going to suddenly criminalize a grandfather who wants to provide a firearm to their grandson or their son or their daughter as a Christmas gift. I mean, can you imagine the absurdity of saying, listen, this is a family heirloom I want to gift to you on Christmas Day, but we got to wait and go through a background check. So again, this is an example of good intentions not leading to good results. And if you want to go after the criminals, if you really want to lower gun violence, then what you do is you prosecute the bad guys that use guns and felonies. But that's not what the liberals want. And that's the thing that's so infuriating is the left is literally going after the law-abiding innocent citizens that have committed no crime, have, as we know, statistically, those that have concealed weapons holders, they're some of the most law-abiding, they have a lower rate of crime than the general population. And listen, I bought my Glock 26 in a private sale from a fellow prosecutor. So the idea that suddenly I would have committed some horrible criminal crime is absurd.
Thanks, Jason. Chuck?
So I think we need to make sure that the laws are enforced. People are not looking for more laws. They're looking for the laws to be enforced that we have. They're not looking for more regulations. They're looking for the regulations that we have to be enforced. But I want to go back to an earlier question. I hope this doesn't sound as if Jason and I have something going here. We don't. And I full well understand his position. I would just ask him to reconsider that you can't have a situation where a crime has somebody's name on it. Someone commits a crime, we need to rely on judges to give better sentences. We need to rely on those sentences. But when the person completes his or her sentence, we can't give him a new sentence. If he commits another crime under that, after committing that sentence, of course we can give him a new sentence. But if someone has served out the sentence that the judge has handed to them, violent or not, we cannot continue to punish that person. We must allow that person's rights to be restored. Again, we have to rely on good judges giving appropriate sentences. The sentence must fit the crime.
Thank you, Chuck. We're on the last two questions. This next question goes to Jason first. What's your opinion of prosecutors dropping gun charges as part of a plea bargain?
I mean, if the question is prosecutorial discretion, I think you have to give prosecutors a large amount of discretion whenever they're prosecuting a case. I mean, that happens on multiple fronts. Oftentimes, if you're prosecuting a case where you have a witness that, quite frankly, won't testify, refuse to testify, or you can't find a witness that can testify, or if you find that the situation warrants it, then yeah, you have to give the prosecutor that kind of discretion, because ultimately it can create a nightmare scenario. But to kind of go back on a previous point, I'm not trying to necessarily go back to my friend Chuck, but I think the problem we run into is you have a McAuliffe Northern Parole Board that they're not allowing criminals to serve their sentence. Criminals, we've seen over 100 murderers get out from prison by this parole board, and so they've been sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And now it's not a judge that's making the sentence; it's a parole board that's letting it back on our streets. And I think that's a little bit of the distinction.
Thanks, Jason. Chuck, what is your opinion of prosecutors dropping gun charges as part of a plea bargain?
I actually agree with what Jason just said, the first part. I don't agree with the second part, but I agree with the first part that our prosecutors in our judicial system need some discretion. That's how cases are not only fought, that's how judicial economy is saved. But I think before we can make that decision, we need to look at, are we talking about gun use or gun possession? And I think some consideration needs to be given to that. Judges are quite keen on whether or not someone who has used a gun is going to be subject to the mandatory sentence, or whether someone who has just singularly possessed it. On my earlier point, I think that Jason is correct. I agree with that. I think that we're talking two different things. I'm talking about judge sentencing people, and I think he's talking about parole boards releasing people. In my opinion, life without parole means just that, life without parole.
Thank you, Chuck. Leslie?
Thank you. So I also think that the prosecutors need prosecutorial discretion, and we all know and have seen in the past where many times there are multiple charges added with the knowledge that a prosecutor is going to look at the evidence and is going to work through those charges to determine, what is actually the appropriate charges to go forward on. And so dropping gun charges is part of a plea bargain. We have and hopefully continue to elect conservative Commonwealth attorneys, and they're going to look at this. They're going to establish what the evidence really shows and what they can support. And as to this issue, I want to kind of double back to my comments. Again, I clearly stated I have absolutely what has happened with this parole board is absolutely there's no accountability. It is absolutely releasing felons, convicted felons, with no accountability. But when there is accountability, when folks have done, there is appropriate procedures in place, then we look at restoration of rights.
Thanks, Leslie. I think we could do a whole hour on Commonwealth attorneys races in the state of Virginia. This is the last question, and it's going to go to Chuck first. Are you a gun owner? And if so, what types of firearms, what shooting disciplines, and do you belong to a shooting club or range?
Yes, I'm a gun owner. I have a Glock 19. I have an AR-15, and I belong to the range here in Virginia Beach on Virginia's Boulevard. I will say, having served in the Marine Corps, I'm quite familiar with guns, certainly serving in the Navy JAG Corps, quite familiar with pistols. My background, I think, speaks for itself. In the Marine Corps, I was an 0311 grunt, which means that our primary weapon was our rifle. We had switched from the N14s to the N16 to the M16s when I joined. So I'm quite familiar with the M16s, but also I'm quite familiar with my AR-15. I happen to like it. I take it everywhere I go. I even have it right now here in my office. But yes, I'm a gun owner. I'm a concealed weapons holder. And I just believe that we have the right to exist under a constitution that guarantees our rights to bear arms.
Thank you, Chuck. Leslie?
Thank you. Yes, I'm a gun owner. I actually have two. I have a .45 and I also have a revolver. I was really proud that my daughter and I both, did classes together to start, and we've both been to different shooting ranges. And right now, my daughter and her husband own 10 acres of property, and we many times just collaboratively go out there, with family members, with other friends, and actually engage in target shooting, and gives us the opportunity also to try out different guns and just really get a feel for it. I do think and believe that if you own a gun, that you need to continue to engage in, in practice and in target shooting, so that you're comfortable with it, so that it's, the first time you pick it up is not in, an antagonistic situation where you don't really feel comfortable with what you're doing. And my law partner as well is armed and has several different firearms. And so we frequently are also carrying, with an office downtown in the city right now, I will tell you, it's not a happy place to be.
Thanks, Leslie. And Jason?
Yeah, my favorite is my Glock 26 extended magazine. It's gotten so expensive to shoot these days. The price of ammo is like the price of gold. But the one thing I am blessed is my wife's family does have some property out in Pungo that they have built. It's not me. I have trouble operating heavy equipment, so I would not be somebody who's good at woodworking. But they have designed their own shooting range, and it has been a lot of fun to go out there as well. But listen, I mean, the origins of this, I didn't necessarily grow up in a household with firearms, but nothing made more clear to me for the Second Amendment when situation with my family, had a direct threat made against it. And nothing's more terrifying when you know that the things most precious to you in this world, that there are bad people out in this world that want to do them harm. And that one that gives you a sense of helplessness, but also that's why the Second Amendment is given to you by your rights under the God, so you're able to then defend yourself and defend your family. If that dark day ever comes, you're ready and you're prepared.
Yes, thank you, Jason. We could not have timed this better. We're supposed to go to 9:30 and everybody gets 2 minutes to finish, and it's 9:24. So hooray for our timing. We're going to go ahead and have Leslie do her 2-minute finish. And then we'll go to Jason and Chuck.
Well, thank you. Thank you for opening up this conversation. I think this is just really a critical, fundamental issue that really exemplifies why we need a new Attorney General. I mean, again, the fact that, we are feeling so compromised, everyone in this, all of our citizens are feeling so compromised. We feel like nobody's got our back. Nobody's standing up for our liberties. This is, again, where the Constitution begins and ends with the Second Amendment. It affects the First Amendment. It affects the 10th, the 4th, the 5th, the 14th, everything we've talked about tonight. And we have nobody that has our back and is standing up for this. So, it's why I've stood up to run for Attorney General. Again, I have a vast legal background and legal experience, as well as a business experience. The Attorney General's role is so critical. And I think it just gives confidence to the folks also that whether it be, the Second Amendment or a challenge to their First Amendment right of free speech, what we've seen during this pandemic in particular has been so troubling, as we've seen the inconsistencies of what the current government has shut down. Recognizing the strength of a strong Attorney General could not at any point in time be more critically important than it is right now. And so, I welcome the opportunity to have this conversation tonight. I thank you all for, hosting this forum and allowing us to have these conversations that I think are really critically important to the people as they make these choices going forward. I think it's critically important that we have the 3 top strongest folks on that ballot that we can have in November and take back this Commonwealth. So thank you all for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Jason?
Over my shoulder is a portrait of one of my heroes, President Ronald Reagan. One of my earliest memories was my mother taking me to see her become a U.S. citizen after she had come here from communist Cuba. And then one of the earliest other memories is her taking me with her to see her vote for her first presidential election for Ronald Reagan. And he said this, he said, of all the nations in the world, America is the only nation in which our national anthem ends with a question mark. Are we still the land of the free and the home of the brave? Now that question has been presented to every single generation since our founding. And ultimately, what guarantees that freedom, the fact that we are the land of the free and the home of the brave, are our Bill of Rights, but in particular that Second Amendment right that guarantees those freedoms. But ultimately, we understand, and I like to call it the American miracle, right? My mother fled Cuba in the fall of 1965 with nothing, and almost 50 years to the day was able to vote for me to represent her in the oldest democracy in the Western Hemisphere, the Virginia House of Delegates. But that American miracle, it's not being taught anymore in our schools. It's not being talked anymore in our pop culture. It's not being talked anymore by our media. And everything that makes this country the unique experiment that it has given more second chances and more opportunities to more people. One of my favorite stories of an immigrant coming over and seeing the Statue of Liberty the first time and saying, that is the greatest light the world has ever seen since the Star of Bethlehem. But ultimately, that American miracle is being trashed in ways we've never seen and challenged in ways we never thought would be possible. So if there's any reason why I'm running, like I said, I'm a former prosecutor. I've handled over 600 criminal cases, well north of a 90% conviction rate. But if there's any reason I'm running, is to preserve that American miracle. And so we're calling our delegates that want to come out on May 8th, our freedom builders. I'm asking people if you want to stand with me and be part of that, to defend this last best hope on earth that I think is so precious and I think is really, really facing challenges you never thought before. Go to my website, jason4ag.com. That's jason4ag.com. Look forward to seeing you all on the trail ahead.
Thank you, Jason. And Chuck, you want to round it out here?
I would be proud to serve as Attorney General of Virginia because I believe in these words. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish a constitution for the United States of America. But we need to be careful, because if we ever use the word give and forget that it's not given, our amendments, they're guaranteed to us. We'll forget these words. The 10th Amendment, the end of the Bill of Rights, all power, not specifically delegated to the federal government, nor prohibited by it to the states, is reserved to the states and to the people. And this is the crossroads. We need an attorney general who believes in the whole Constitution. I believe that we need to get back to the Constitution. And if we get back to the Constitution, we have no problems. We see in the attorney general's role an opportunity to uphold the Constitution. That is what I do. That is what I will do. That's what it's called for. And that is what I think Virginians deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Again, I want to thank our candidates for making the time to come and talk to the VCDL membership. This invitation went out to 30,000 members, and there's a 60,000 member Virginia alert system that this went out to. This will be up on the YouTube channel, on the VCDL YouTube site. And I probably should have mentioned this at the very beginning. The process in which Leslie, Jason, and Chuck will be running will be on Saturday, May 8th. If you want to vote in that process, the best way to get the form to become a delegate is to go to the virginia.gop website, and there is a calendar on there. Click on 2021 nomination. There's a calendar, and you can see it's by county. So some of the deadlines have already passed. I know Loudoun has passed, Fairfax, Prince William County, I think, is at the end of the week. So these are the large Northern Virginia counties. But I want to make sure that anybody that's, in the state of Virginia, please check that calendar, fill out the form. You can submit it usually by email, and the call for each county is on there. So that's how you will vote for one of our attorney general candidates. And our next forum is going to be the lieutenant governors. They will be talking next Tuesday, same time, same place. So that would be April 20th. And then on April 28th, the governors will be speaking to the VCDL membership and governors across the state of Virginia. So once again, I want to say thank you so much. I want to ask, does Philip have any closing comments?
Yeah, I do. And again, I want to thank everybody that's here listening to these candidates. I want to thank Jason and Chuck and Leslie. They're patriots stepping forward to help protect our Commonwealth. Never had I realized the true significance of an attorney general until the one we've got now taught me some bitter lessons about just how important that position is to all of us. And indeed, I think maybe Leslie mentioned it, that, and actually all three of you did, I think, that how let down we've been by an attorney general that's not backing the Constitution and is not standing with the citizens. That's his job. And he's done a miserable job. He has, if anything, damaged our rights in Virginia. So the candidates running for attorney general, it's critical that we have good people. I did enjoy listening to this. I think all three of you are certainly worthy candidates. And I look forward to having an attorney general in this Commonwealth that I can be proud of again, as opposed to embarrassed. So thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you, everyone. Have a really great evening.